this is Sally, and welcome to Reclaiming Pride, LGBT+ survivors of narcissistic abuse. Before we start, there is a trigger warning. The episodes of this podcast may at times refer to domestic violence, emotional, financial, and sexual abuse. To begin, as always, let's start with a one-word feelings check. That is, what is one word for how you are feeling today? Not how anyone else around you is feeling, but how are you feeling today, in one word? This week, we're going to delve into the often misunderstood topic of narcissism and gaslighting, being terms that are thrown around casually, but actually the reality of their impact in relationships goes far deeper than common usage suggests. So before we go into any kind of definition, what do the terms narcissism and gaslighting mean to you? Have you heard people saying things like, I was triggered. This is gaslighting. They're a narcissist. Are they all really true? So let's begin by defining the terms. First of all, narcissism. It isn't just about being self-absorbed or vain. It's a personality disorder marked by an inflated sense of self-importance, a constant need for admiration, and a lack of empathy for other people. Gaslighting, on the other hand, is a form of psychological manipulation where one person seeks to make another person doubt their own perceptions, memories, and sanity. So gaslighting is actually used as part of narcissism, as a form of narcissistic abuse. So let's break it down further. So first, narcissism. So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM as it's known, is the handbook used by healthcare professionals in the United States and much of the world as the authoritative guide to the diagnosis of mental disorders. The DSM contains descriptions, symptoms, and other criteria for diagnosing these mental disorders. So here's what the DSM says about narcissism. The latest edition of the DSM, which is the DSM number 5, says that NPD is characterized by a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, a constant need for admiration, and a lack of empathy, beginning in early adulthood and present in various contexts. This pattern is indicated by 5 or more of the following 9 traits. 1. A grandiose sense of self-importance. 2. Preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. 3. Belief that one is special and unique and can only be understood by or associate with other special or uniquely high-status people. 4. Requires excessive and repeated admiration. 5. A sense of entitlement. 6. Interpersonally exploitative behavior. 7. Lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of other people. 8. Envious of others or believes others are envious of them. And finally, 9, shows arrogant, haughty behavior or attitudes. It's important to note that the NPD diagnosis requires that these traits are inflexible and stable over time and cause significant functional impairment or distress. I spent 13 years in a relationship with a person who checks all 9 of the DSM indicators for NPD. As we've seen in other episodes, NPD is one of the B cluster personality disorders. The others are borderline, histrionic, and antisocial personality disorders. Antisocial personality disorder also encompasses psychopathy. Imagine them being a bit like a Venn diagram of circles where they intersect somewhat, but for the most part, they have their own set of traits. Recent research also shows brain differences similar to those on the autism spectrum, people who have Alzheimer's disease, and also those who suffer from severe depression. Their brains are literally wired differently and do not fire the same way as those without NPD. So, in other words, folks with NPD have physical brain characteristics similar to those folks in those categories I just named. There is also some difference in size shown in the prefrontal cortex of somebody with narcissistic personality disorder. It's smaller. Now let's look at the term gaslighting. The term gaslighting originates from the 1938 play Gaslight by Patrick Hamilton, and this is later adapted into films, but most notably the film made in 1944 starring Ingrid Bergman and Charles Boyer. In the story, a husband manipulates his wife into believing she is losing her mind by dimming the gas lights in their home and then denying that the lights are flickering when she questions him about it. This systematic deception and psychological manipulation are aimed at making a victim doubt their own perceptions, and this gives rise to the term gaslighting, which has since become widely used to describe similar forms of psychological abuse. In everyday conversation, these terms are often used lightly, describing someone who's a bit too full of themselves, the narcissist, or manipulative. But in reality, the impact of narcissism and gaslighting in relationships can be profound and deeply damaging. So let's explore how these behaviors manifest within intimate connections. Let's look at what gaslighting is and what it isn't. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation, as we've seen, where one person seeks to undermine another person's reality, causing them to doubt their perceptions, memories, and sanity. It involves such tactics as denial, trivialization, blame shifting to erode the victim's confidence and control their behavior. So, for example, imagine a partner who consistently tells their significant other that they are overreacting or being too sensitive whenever the victim expresses hurt or frustration. This invalidation of feelings and experiences is a classic gaslighting technique. Conversely, healthy communication involves respectful disagreement without dismissing or belittling the other person's emotions or point of view. Providing constructive feedback or differing viewpoints in a supportive manner fosters understanding and growth, in contrast with the sharply manipulative tactics of gaslighting. So here are two examples of what gaslighting is not. It's not a difference of opinion. So suppose two friends have a discussion about politics and one friend presents evidence and arguments supporting their own viewpoint. The other friend disagrees and presents counter-arguments. If the first friend accuses the other of gaslighting simply because they hold a different perspective, it would be inaccurate. Gaslighting involves manipulation and deceit to undermine someone's reality. It isn't just simply holding differing opinions. Another thing that gaslighting is not is forgetting details. So, for example, in a romantic relationship, one partner might forget details about a past event that the other partner remembers quite vividly. So if the partner with the better memory accuses the forgetful one of gaslighting them, assuming it's a deliberate attempt to distort reality, it wouldn't be an accurate assessment. Forgetting details or having differing recollections of events doesn't necessarily constitute gaslighting. It's a normal part of human memory and communication. Picture being in a relationship where your partner constantly needs to be the center of attention, dismisses your feelings, and lacks empathy for your struggles. They might even do things like laugh when you cry, or deliberately try to emotionally or physically hurt you. This could be indicative of narcissistic behavior. So over time, this can lead to a one-sided dynamic where your needs and emotions are consistently invalidated and your self-worth is eroded. Gaslighting further complicates matters by distorting your reality and making you doubt your own experiences. So your partner might try denying things that they've said or done, shift blame onto you, or even rewrite history altogether. This manipulation can leave you feeling confused, isolated, angry, and questioning your own sanity. It's crucial to recognize that these patterns of behavior aren't just personality quirks. They're forms of emotional abuse. Seeking validation and admiration at the expense of another person's well-being is not only harmful, but indicative of a deeper and underlying psychological issue. Similarly, manipulating someone's perception of reality to maintain control is a violation of trust and autonomy, and it is abusive. So what happens when powerful words like gaslighting and narcissism are used incorrectly? Well, researchers at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence have looked at these words and others that are often misused and overused. These are words such as trauma, gaslighting, narcissism, and depressed. Researchers have started to call these fuzzy words because their misuse gets in the way of clear communication. You might think of these words as therapy words because you've heard them discussed in therapy or by mental health professionals. There are serious and potential consequences when these words are misused. The bottom line is that when people misuse the terms narcissism and gaslighting, it can actually make it harder for people who are actually experiencing these abusive behaviors from being taken seriously, like the boy who cried wolf. Another problem is that people who know nothing about true narcissism think that it's all grandiosity and bluster. Certain politicians might even spring to mind with this type of use of the word narcissist. A hard fact is that it isn't all like that in truth. Most of the time, true narcissism, gaslighting, and narcissistic abuse is very insipid, and it happens behind closed doors. When we look at the misuse of the term gaslighting, we can look back to 2007 actually. A man called Robin Stern published a book called The Gaslight Effect, which popularized the term gaslighting. Over the past decade, we've watched the meaning of the word become diluted and warped through overuse. Today, we hear it used several times a week, often inaccurately, and it's become so pervasive that the Merriam-Webster dictionary named gaslighting its 2022 word of the year, believe it or not. As we've seen, gaslighting is a form of emotional abuse in which the gaslighter uses psychological manipulation to undermine the gaslightee. This causes the person to question themselves and their reality. The gaslighter's need for control and power in a relationship is a key component of gaslighting, and so that's why it's often used by narcissists, because they are driven by the need for control, because they actually have a sense of complete chaos going on inside. So what they try and do is control everybody else around them. Today, many people use gaslighting when somebody merely disagrees with them. Well-meaning partners, co-workers, or family members may not be skilled in resolving conflict in a relationship, but that does not mean that they're gaslighting or being gaslit. Mislabeling and name-calling can break down communication. It can also lead you to think that you might be in an emotionally abusive relationship when you are not, or make someone who is in an emotionally abusive relationship further invalidated. Perhaps the most often misconstrued word of the past 5 years is gaslighting. It has been widely adopted as a way to describe any act that's insensitive, a lie, or simply a difference of opinion. But the reality is that gaslighting in itself is a lot darker. One that was very common with my ex was to say that things never happened, or that things that never happened happened. So even when there was more than one person present, she would do it. People would literally be too scared to contradict her due to her narcissistic rage or her abusive mouth, basically. I recounted in a previous episode one time when we actually met at a restaurant, and I'd never been to this restaurant before. In fact, I had to look it up, and this was in the days before smartphones, so I had to print out a map of how to get there. And once I got there, the onslaught began because she was telling me that I'd been to the restaurant before and with her, and it ended up screaming. It was embarrassing. We were sitting outside the restaurant at a table, people were staring, and she was accusing me of being uncaring and not caring about our memories and our relationship, and how could I forget that I had been there before? I had definitely been there before. I had never been there before. And this was just pure gaslighting, and it was really awful. Two people can have a different understanding of a situation, two conflicting perspectives, and it's okay. It happens. It's not always gaslighting. Gaslighting is abusive, making someone feel insane, making them question their own reality by intentionally trying to distort their memories is an awful, awful thing to do to someone. Being in a disagreement when a person feels this and another person feels that isn't gaslighting. It's just part of life. It's normal to disagree. So how can you distinguish between common usage and true lived experiences of narcissism and gaslighting? Well, pay attention to the dynamics within your relationships. Are you constantly feeling belittled, manipulated, shamed, or invalidated, whether in private, in public, or both? Trust your instincts and seek support from friends, family, or a therapist who can help you navigate these challenging situations. It's also essential to understand that healing from narcissistic abuse and one of its components, gaslighting, takes a long time and a lot of support. Therapy can provide a safe space to process your experiences, rebuild your sense of self, and establish healthy boundaries moving forward. How carelessly and often inaccurately people use powerful words. We've heard countless people use and misuse similarly strong terms. I'm totally traumatized. He lied to me about where he was last night. You are gaslighting me. I do not have to wear a mask indoors. I'm so depressed. They ran out of my favorite dish. When we look at the misuse of the term narcissism, we see that the term narcissist has become a way to attack someone the accuser feels has an overly inflated sense of self, thrives on attention, or insists on getting their way in the moment. But these qualities might be defensive adjustments, personality traits, or a way of behaving in an unfamiliar culture. If someone does something you find inconsiderate or selfish, that alone does not make someone a narcissist. And calling someone a narcissist is so fraught that it seldom yields a productive outcome. Even if someone actually has narcissistic personality disorder, it's often said that you should never do that, because what will then happen is that true narcissist will throw it back at you and actually accuse you of being a narcissist, yet another form of gaslighting. A healthy ego allows us to experience positive self-esteem and set necessary boundaries, which are important in relationships and goal setting. Narcissism, which is unhealthy, leads to self-centeredness, self-involvement, and indifference to others' feelings, and it is pervasive and it lasts for the person's entire life. In an extreme, the narcissist is unable to sustain empathic or meaningful connections at all with anyone, ever. A narcissistic personality disorder, as I've said, is a lifelong pattern of these characteristics to a pathological level. Conflating narcissism also with healthy self-interest can make it difficult to advocate for yourself or protect your boundaries. It's not just okay, but necessary in a healthy relationship to ask for what you need and to do so without fear of judgment. That's different. Also, not every person that acts mean sometimes is a narcissist. Sometimes people are just idiots. But often people are pretty multifaceted. Narcissism, true narcissism, is very different. People with NPD are literally quite incapable of acting out of anything but their own self-interest, regardless to the cost to others. Narcissistic abuse is extremely serious. It's not an insult to be thrown at someone for being rude or just for getting upset. Often people who exhibit narcissistic traits will be the first to call out other people as narcissists, because from their perspective, anyone that slights them is a problem that needs to be handled. That's a sign of a true narcissist. Narcissism is a serious and dangerous personality disorder. The term narcissist should never be thrown around as a common insult. Watering down these kinds of terms like narcissism and gaslighting takes a lot of power away from them. And when we call out abuse, it needs to be taken seriously. So do you see what I mean? It just stops people who are in abusive situations from being taken seriously. Other terms that have crept in from the therapist's couch into the public lexicon include love bombing, triggered, grooming, and toxic. Frequently, mental health experts say when we overuse these words, we misuse them. Misusing words like narcissism and gaslighting, as we've seen, dilutes the meaning. If we're very quick to throw labels on something, it can derail a nuanced and important conversation that could actually be happening. As an aside as well, and a term that we've used in other episodes and will continue to use in episodes to come, is the term trauma bond. Now, this has also started to be misused as well. Because of the term trauma bonding's misuse, many people now mistakenly believe that trauma bonding involves individuals sharing their traumatic experiences in order to strengthen their connection. However, this is not the case. In reality, what trauma bonding actually is the profound attachment formed between an abuser and their victim. Some people call it Stockholm Syndrome. It serves as a prime example, actually, where individuals develop positive emotions towards those who have harmed them and continue to harm them. Trauma bonding encompasses both emotional and hormonal ties experienced by the abused. The abuser's alternating between displays of affection and abuse leads a victim to cling to moments of relief, fostering a belief that survival depends on the abuser. This bond is often misinterpreted as love, making it challenging for an abused person to explain why they don't leave when they're asked that awful question, why don't you just leave? So here are some scenarios of narcissism and gaslighting. See if you recognize any of these patterns. It could be someone who often puts their partner down in subtle ways and then accuses them of being too sensitive when they get upset. It could be someone who frequently exaggerates their own accomplishments and gets annoyed when people don't praise them enough. They often never take responsibility for mistakes. It could be someone who often tells their partner that they imagine things that they know happened, making their partner question their own memory, perceptions, and ultimately their own reality. It could also be someone who demands constant attention and admiration from their employees. They claim credit for work that they haven't done and shift blame when things go wrong. Did you recognize any of those? Maybe you recognize all of them. In conclusion, it's evident that the widespread misuse of terms like narcissism and gaslighting has far-reaching consequences, both on an individual and societal level. By diluting these concepts into mere buzzwords, we risk trivializing the experiences of those who have truly suffered at the hands of narcissistic or manipulative individuals. Moreover, the overuse of these terms in everyday discourse diminishes their potency and obscures their significance in clinical and psychological contexts. This not only undermines efforts to address and understand these complex issues, but also perpetuates a culture of misunderstanding and miscommunication. In short, it's really awful for victims of narcissistic abuse to hear this stuff get thrown around time and time again, when you've had to bite your tongue and be gaslit and tortured for years. To hear it thrown around as a buzzword is just awful. I hope that this has helped to highlight how misuse of these clinical terms can be damaging. I also hope that this may have even validated anyone listening who has been through this horrendous abuse and has had to hear it reduced to buzzwords. Please note, this podcast is not intended to replace professional therapy or counselling. It serves as a supplementary resource for support and encouragement. Listeners, you are encouraged to seek professional help if needed. I did, and it works for me every day. Stay tuned, and I look forward to healing with you again next time. Bye-bye.